Here's Trevinko. Lovely ball through towards Altidore. Altidore! Toronto FC's big acquisitions combine to tie the game. Josie Altidore.
The Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast with Dwayne Rollins and Kevin Laramie. The award-winning soccer podcast that covers every single aspect of Canadian soccer. And now, without further ado, here's Dwayne Rollins.
And welcome to a special edition of the Two Solitudes Podcast. I'm Dwayne Rollins along with Kevin Laramie. Kevin's sitting in a park right now or something. We have a trade to discuss. Kevin, I'll let you set it up and then we'll go from there.
After the last week of drama in Montreal with Bakary Soumare making some kind of a coming out in the media and the club trying to get rid of him, well, he's been traded to FC Dallas for Canadian international Kyle Bekker, who is on his way to the Montreal Impact. Soumare started 16 out of 24 games this season so far, but was in a slump and bad performances and a bad relationship with some people in the team in the last week or so. So now he's off to Dallas. And Dwayne, can you tell us a little bit more about Kyle Bekker, Canadian international, former Toronto FC player and academy product?
Yeah. How do I be polite about Kyle Bekker? Well, anyone who watched the Canadian national team play in the last little while has a bit of an understanding of what Kyle Bekker is. First off, we'll be positive. What Kyle Bekker is very good at is dead ball situations. He's good on free kicks. He's good on the corners. He has a lot of skill in putting that in. He's never scored a goal yet, but he has come close. I mean, that just sounds kind of like faint praise when I say it like that. But he is quite good at that. He has had limited playing time throughout his time, both at Toronto and in Dallas. What Kyle Bekker is not great at, to move it to the area where I have more to talk about, and sorry Montreal fans for that, is he has very little defensive responsibility or understanding of how to play defensively. He gives the ball up a lot, and despite his ability on the dead ball, he doesn't really get involved in the course of play very often. He's not a very influential player during when the whistle's not been blowing. So there is a lot of weakness to his game, but he does enough technically right that he keeps getting chances. And that's been Kyle Bekker's story. This is his third stop, as we just said. We all want our Canadian internationals to have playing time. I think there's just a active debate within Canadian circles of whether Kyle Bekker should be a Canadian international. And this is his last chance to prove it, I think, Kevin.
We will see. The one thing, though, that FC Dallas didn't really have is a USL team as well in the organization, really close to the first team. That's interesting to see. If Kyle Bekker doesn't get playing time with the Impact, he would be slotted in with FC Montreal for a couple of games, so that he can get some chemistry and some playing time with some fellow Canadian international. And that, in the last couple of days, it was a low point for Canadian soccer. And maybe that trade could be a starting of a new chemistry for a couple of players. It'll be interesting in the future to see that. But first of all, Bekker's going to have to fight for some playing time in a very congested midfield to start with the Montreal Impact.
Yeah, the idea of him going to USL, I think, would benefit his career a little bit, although he is in the older scale. I'm going to have to correct you a little bit. You said he was a TFC Academy product. He's actually not. He's a Sigma Academy product. Yeah, and that's an important distinction within the political climate here in Toronto. There's obviously some competitive juices that flow between Sigma and the TFC Academy. Johnny Grant is also at the USL side there. He's a Sigma kid, so I find that interesting that whether Bekker was told that they needed to move him and they tried to accommodate him by getting him to somewhere where he might be, maybe Sigma has a good relationship. That's just something that planted in my head when I heard that. Like I said, there is enough technically there for Bekker that you like what you see, but I think he is in many ways the final victim of the lack of academy products in Canada when he came through. Sigmund was really just starting. He was their first kind of products that they put into Boston College right out of their first class. I didn't have a lot of time or influence from them at that point in time. Most of his formative development occurred basically in those Boston College years, and he was so skilled at that level that he kind of stagnated. He didn't really develop his full all-around game because his skill level game was so high at college that he was able to float, and therein lies the biggest issue. So, a year at USL, if he gets some good coaching and maybe gets a little bit of time here and there in the, as you said, crowded Montreal midfield, might be good for him to take that slight step back. But as I said, this is a player that really has to prove it now. In some people, I've heard the argument made by non-Canadians, people that have no, stake in his game, that he might be one of the worst players in the league. So there you have it, Impact fans. We just picked up. Why don't you talk about the other side of the trade, Kevin?
Yes, Bakary Soumare going to Dallas. Bakary Soumare was before the beginning of the season when they picked him up in the supplemental draft. And my thoughts on Bakary Soumare the last couple of years, he was a reckless player. He corrected that this season, but his performance has been highs and lows. As much as he played well in the CONCACAF and in the actual MLS this season, he was giving away the ball. He was miscommunicating, mistimed tackles, and it led to him to a very bad dip of form that eventually led to a personality clash, I would say, with technical director Adam Braz and more people, and he violated the trust of those players by doing it coming out in the media the last couple of days, and it created a whole controversy in Montreal. And now, of course, his relationship with Frank Lopez is well known and well documented, and so he was maybe not getting the playing time that was compared to his performances. What I mean is other players were having better performances and not having his playing time, and that became a problem over the last couple of weeks, and other players like Cabrera and Lefebvre have stepped up, and Soumare was basically had become non-wanted in Montreal, and he was not happy with it. And in his own words, in French, he said, if I'm not going to be asked to do it here, I'm going to need it to do somewhere else. And he's been traded to Dallas. It's going to be interesting to see if Dallas really uses him in the right way. They have a congested defense as well, with great players in the likes of the Michel and the rest of the defense crew, Matt Edges and everybody. But Dallas now has Soumare as well. But for Montreal, it's really important. Soumare has a $370,000 price tag, which Cal Bekker does not. So it's a roster, an international roster spot being liberated from Montreal with Soumare leaving, and on top of it, Canadian International coming to town. But with that, you have a spot more and a lot of money to get somebody with it. So I think it's interesting in the upcoming market with that trade done. Montreal has a bit more leeway now.
Yeah, I think that is ultimately the other way that you need to look at this trade. That as much as they're sort of here for just all two listeners, the Canadian ones anyway, there's a certain hook to it because Bekker is involved. I think that the real value of this trade on both sides of it, if you look at Dallas moving out of midfielder to make room in their midfield there a little bit as well, to add something there. And I've seen some people on Twitter already this morning from Dallas speculating that that's what this is about, is them looking internationally to bring in, and keep in mind, Bekker was an international player for them too, right? So they're looking to add space to their roster, probably with an international midfielder coming in. And I think the other side of it too is, Soumare's on the big number. He's an international. You put in a Canadian on a smaller number, then suddenly you can look to, what Italians are hanging around right now in Montreal, Kevin.
Exactly. There's rumors of Aquilani and Ugo Montenegro, if I'm not mistaken, but it's always rumors, and they've been denied by Enzo Cucina and Adam Braz in the club. So that'll be interesting going forward. Maybe we've seen the Argentinian file with Cabrera, as well as Romero and Piatti. It's going to be interesting. One thing I wanted to say, Dwayne, and I'm going to send it to you with this. A couple of Bakary Soumare 2 days ago when he came out in the media, he said that a lot of players were forced to come to Montreal. If that was said to you, who would you think he's talking about?
Forced to go. I imagine the Americans you're talking about. But then again, you look at a guy like Jack Mackey, I think he's having a good little revitalization of his career there based on what's happening in Philadelphia. So that's not the worst thing idea. I think he's just in general talking about, and it speaks to what we allude to all the time on this show, the reluctance of a certain type of middle class earner within MLS to come to Canada. And this isn't necessarily us being bitter or anything when we say that. It's a reality that the Canadian teams have to overcome, and one that I think that gets underplayed a lot because Canadians like to underplay it because we don't first off, we don't want to think that people don't want to come here because we like our country, and there's all the opportunity here, and it's the idea that it's some wasteland is a bit ridiculous, and all those sort of things. The other thing that we tend to not want to just use these American players that we watch and we can leak out of being that kind of cynical, I guess, about it. But then there's so many factors involved, and we've talked about this many times in the show before. You add the language issue in Montreal as well, and not so much for the player. The player's going to be fine. It's the rest of the people around the player's lives that you really have to think about that. If they've grown up in a place where the idea of French speaking is completely terrifying to them, and the idea of them not being able to work well or easily anyway, of having to deal with a second language when you're shopping or whatever, could be something that we're kind of used to it. If we live in Eastern Canada, we dealt with that idea and we adjust, and even if we're not great with our French, we make do. But for people that haven't been exposed to that can be a real issue, and that's probably what he's alluding to. And it is a factor that they're going to have to overcome forever, right?
Absolutely, but with hindsight, what I was thinking last night, I think I had a revelation, maybe an epiphany. I don't know, maybe a eureka moment. Remember when Piatti arrived last year? He was talking about, I'm here for a couple 2 years, but then I'm thinking about New York and LA. And if you know how the league works with DPs and stuff, they don't necessarily choose where they're going to go. So maybe that would explain Piatti's performance this year. I don't know. It's something. It's a thought that it's maybe just me being crazy, but it's a thought that came to mind last night when I was reading and looking at the Soumare situation.
It's a credit to Piatti's play that whole controversy has been forgotten now, I think, right? He's come in and he's performed, and he hasn't mailed it in out there, which I think might have been the worry back then, that he was just floating around to get to, quote unquote, a better place. I think you're right. Maybe, he signed with whatever. He has approached MLS, his agent approached MLS, and they sort of directed him to a place where he might be able to be a benefit, and then Montreal took it from there. That's possible. And, it's maybe even probable within the single entity idea of MLS. But I think that those comments back then, and I think I said this at the time, have as much to do with how a foreign player looks at the sport. The impact from someone outside of North America are going to be a equivalent of a Stoke City in the English Premier League, right? That's how, I'm not saying they're like that, Impact fans. I'm saying that the perception of someone who's never heard of MLS and doesn't know who half these teams are is that MLS's top teams are in New York and LA, and that's what everyone's aspiring to, because every league in the world has 2 or 3 teams that dominate, and the rest of the league teams are there to fill up the numbers. And it wouldn't be controversial at all in some parts of the world for a player to go to a mid-table team and say, I'm going to perform hard for this team for a couple of years and see if I can get up to another level, because that's just how the sport works, right? It doesn't work that way in MLS, and I think that's why those comments by Piatti rubbed people the wrong way at the time, because we just don't view, every team parity, blah, blah, blah. But I think that was basically where that was coming from. There's a lot of challenges in Canada. What's the name of this podcast again, right?
To the Solitudes, buddy.
Yeah, and it's not just necessarily the double entendre about Kevin and I being from 2 parts of Canada. It's about the 2 parts of the league.
Exactly. All right, so let's wrap this up here on this breaking news edition. The real show will be coming out tomorrow. I'm on my way back to Montreal today, and we'll have more details and more reactions tomorrow in the regular show of Two Solitudes podcast. Look for a USL Radio to come in the very near future as well, and 5 Rings podcast on CanadaIsPlaying.com. A brand new show will be posted within the hour, and we talk about the Pan Am Games, so it's the Pan Am Games edition. And Dwayne, I'll throw it to you for this time.
Yeah, own your soccer. That's how we said this one. No, anyway, I forget what you say, Kevin. But yes, we'll be back tomorrow, and own your everything. Win all the medals. Take all the soccer.